Welcome everybody. We are 40 people for now. We have 100 people registered, so I guess they will be arriving slowly. So welcome to the very first webinar of ZWE Europe. We had a hard time in picking a juicy topic to get you started with the series of webinars that will be running from now till next year. And so my name is Esra Tat. I'm the Network and Development Coordinator at ZWE Europe. I will be your moderator for this session. We have with us 4 amazing panelists to help us navigate in the confusing and exciting world of EU legislation. So our topic will be, as you know, the new European legislation on waste was approved in May 2018. And in a nutshell, it aims at taking Europe towards a circular economy. Our first panelist, Ferran Rosa, the Waste Policy Officer at ZWE Europe, will help us navigate in this new targets and what does it mean exactly, what are the main changes. And then we'll have 3 other speakers, Enzo Favoiano, the Scientific Coordinator at ZWE Europe, who will help us understand how to achieve the main targets, sharing some key results from countries and regions, and maybe giving some insight on the Sardinian case. We'll follow after with Jaka Kranz, who is the Secretary General at Ecologists Without Borders from Slovenia, who will help us understand what soft measures are and how they can help to achieve these targets. And we'll finish our round with Zoltan Pastai from EcoBihor, the General Manager, who will explain us how EcoBihor helped making a jump in a municipality in Romania. So before waiting more, I will leave the floor to Ferran Rosa, our Waste Policy Officer. And feel free to use the chat box for your questions. We'll have our online moderator with us who will help us to get the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being with us. I will try to be brief because I guess there's more interest sometimes in the questions than in what I have to explain. But like indeed, this is quite of a juicy topic. Like in most municipalities and countries across Europe and even beyond, they tend to care about how we're going to meet the targets, or either we're going to meet them or not. How is it possible? And trying to make sure that we fulfill the legal obligations, and we're trying to identify this afternoon how to do it and which are these obligations that are coming now into force. Starting just going straight to the point. You have probably heard about the circular economy package. This is a broad package of measures that includes both legislative and non-legislative measures. Like some of them are the ones we're going to explore today, but some others are completely outside of today's conversation, such as the communication on waste to energy, or the single-use plastics legislation, or the strategy on plastics, etc. But in any case, like we're going to focus on the revision of the 3 main directives on waste that there are: the directive on waste, the packaging and packaging waste directive, and the landfill of waste directive. Before entering into the content, those of you who are not familiar with EU law or EU legal system, a directive is a legally binding instrument by which the European Union sets itself objectives, and member states need to achieve these objectives, but the European Union doesn't necessarily oblige in terms of means. So it's a matter of a homogenization of European results, but not necessarily of means. So this is quite important to say, like they are legally binding, so member states and hence municipalities and regions within the member states are obliged Sorry, I got disconnected.
It looks like there's a little technical issue. I think he's coming back. I guess you can see his screen. Yes, he's back.
Sorry. My excuses. What I was saying, like this piece of legislation will be legally binding as of 2020, when all member states will have transposed, meaning adapted this legislation to the national legislation, and in general terms, they set what is the broad framework of waste policies across the EU. Let's see what this broad framework is. It is, first of all, that waste policies have a main objective, that is protecting the environment, and we do it through three main points. First of all, the reduction of the waste and its impact on the environment. Secondly, the reduction of resource use. And thirdly, the improvement of the efficiency of resources. So the idea is not just to reduce the hazard of waste to the environment, but also to make Europe more efficient in the use of natural resources. So that's probably why this piece of legislation have come under an economic agenda, because it's perceived as a way to move forward the European economy. So in order to meet these general objectives, the European Union has set itself a general objective of 65% preparation for reuse and recycling that all EU member states will have to meet by 2035, and a minimum 70% recycling target for packaging. Then are, of course, material specific targets, because then these obligations need to be specified in different materials, but like the general, for the whole packaging, it will be 70%. And then there's a third objective, that is a maximum on landfilling by 2035 of 10%. So how does it work? And the main way of achieving these objectives, as recognized by the European legislation, is by introducing separate collection schemes, and this is something we're gonna hear about with our next speakers. And separate collection for member states, it means that, as it says the legislation, that waste must be separately collected by type and nature, and it cannot be mixed with other materials and other waste that has different properties. Why? Because we're separately collecting the waste because we want to ensure high quality recycling. We want to ensure that preparation for reuse and recycling can take place. So for that, the European legislation sets different obligations on different materials. There's a paper, glass, metals, and plastics that was already mandatory since 2015. We know that the implementation is not always the case, but now it's the type of frame of wording is much stricter. So member states will struggle with complying with EU law if they are not separately collecting these materials. Other than that, the dry recyclables, the traditional ones, there's the bio-waste that, as you know, it makes the most of the waste bin. And this will become mandatory by the end of 2023. All member states, all EU cities will have to collect bio-waste separately. And thirdly, there will be textiles, hazardous waste, and waste oils that will have to get collected separately by 2025. This brings a lot of questions. First of all, is whether the commingled collection that is very typical in certain EU member states will be allowed. Well, the answer is not very straightforward. It really depends. It depends on whether the collection affects the quality of the material or not, because the quality and the high quality recycling is the main objective and the main purpose of separate collection. So if commingled collection is impacting on the quality of the materials, which is the case for some of the collections we have in Europe, then it will not be allowed, because it will not make sure that recycling is possible at the same quality of separate collection. But if it doesn't affect it, why not? You can easily think glass and being separately from metals, plastics, and paper, because for different type of materials, it makes it easier to recycle. This is quite some few obligations for municipalities, but other than that, like what is quite clear is that like the European Union is following quite ambitious trend in this regard, and it's going in with a very clear picture and it's going to bring this is going to bring new obligations. First of all, there's new legislation on single-use plastics that is on the table that is gonna introduce new obligations for municipalities, regions, and member states on waste prevention or single-use plastic prevention and reuse. These are going to bring also improved collection, or are going to impose targets on separate collection of certain types of plastics. And then, of course, they're going to bring also new EPR schemes. Other than that, this path of transitioning towards the circular economy is going to be complemented with new legislation on food waste. The European Commission is expected to come up with legislation by 2023 on food waste prevention targets, on 2024 on reuse and prevention targets, on standalone preparation for reuse targets, and also on targets for commercial waste, on construction demolition waste, textiles recycling, etc. So there's a lot of targets that are going to come. So if you were already scared of the current targets, well, there's no more excuses. The list of targets will just increase. So it's the time of acting now, and probably our next speakers will already give you some tips on how to address this from your local reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was I think it's the first time that I get so excited about EU legislation, seeing all these targets and numbers. We invite you to write down your questions, and at the end of the presentations, we will go through a Q&A session. So I'll actually now leave the floor to Enzo Faguino for a presentation on the key sectors to work on, so to achieve the targets, and giving some data and information from municipalities and regions. So I will leave Enzo Faguino to his presentation. And again, feel free to write down your question in the chat. Thank you. Yes, Enzo, we don't hear you. Yes, and Enzo, can you speak, please? Yes, Enzo.
You can watch my screen right now.
Enzo, can you speak, please? We don't hear you.
Can't you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Ezra, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So I will be making my presentation from the laptop. Unfortunately, apparently I'm having some problems with the microphone from my laptop, and therefore I get connected through the mobile phone. So feel free to stop me or to note anything if anything is not.
Yes, we can hear you, Enzo.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. So let's start with nice things. We love butterflies. Everybody loves butterflies. This is the world-renowned butterfly diagram, which was first issued by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in order to depict whatever is included in circular economy. Of course, I don't want to go deep inside the details of circular economy. You can see, anyway, we are provided with many options in order to keep the materials in the loop. But above all, what I would like to draw your attention to is that we, in the end of the story, what we are aiming for is the minimization of the so-called leakages of materials from circular economy. And both landfilling and incineration are considered to be leakages of materials. We want to keep materials in the loop as long as possible by means of reuse, recycling, and composting. This is a summary of the goals which have been tabled by the circular economy package. Once again, there's something which I would like to draw your attention to in order to supplement what has been already perfectly depicted by Ferran. First of all, the goals are given in terms of material recovery rates. Of course, we've already stressed that in the vision of circular economy, the primary goal is to have less resource-intensive production and consumption patterns. And therefore, in this respect, the best waste is the waste which is not produced. If we only consider the recycling rates, the recycling goals, probably there would be no incentive for waste reduction because it would take, for instance, plastics away from recycling rates, organics away from composting rates, and so on and so forth. But we want also to promote new metrics whereby we blend the effects on both waste reduction and separate collection, leading materials to composting and recycling. And we think that the best metrics would be the minimization of residual waste in kilograms per inhabitant and year. This has not been adopted by the circular economy package, but it's a very good metric in order to assess the efficiency of the schemes intended to achieve the goals of the circular economy as a whole. Also, let me draw your attention to the last bullet point, which is the mandate on separate collection of the organics by 2023. And we see the organics are just so important in order to achieve all the targets related. This is a chart which is summing up the results of a recent survey which was done on the topmost recycling countries across the world. Just to say that for the moment, no country as a national average meets the European targets. These numbers have already been adjusted according to the principles which have been established by the circular economy package, such as, for instance, net of the processed rejects, of course, making assumptions because the calculation methods in this respect are still underway. However, there are already countries, and above all in Europe, in the European Union, which are already on track in order to meet the targets in next few years. But the most important would be to go to zoom into the numbers in order to see what may be done by each and every jurisdictional authority which is mandated to establish the waste management schemes. It may be the municipality, it may be the district, it may be the prefecture, the province, the county, depending on the constitutional architecture in different member states. This is what we would like to address. What may be done by single municipalities or waste management districts in order to achieve the goals as set by the circular economy package. And this is a basic work program. We have seen, by now we have got consistent good practice which has been implemented in many different areas across Europe, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, Central Eastern Europe, Western Europe, urban areas, rural areas, and we know that there is something in common. First of all, curbside programs, collection at the doorstep, because it keeps responsibility on single households, on single individuals, and this must include organics. Then the waste prevention practices which may be implemented already at the local level, pending better industrial policy in order to address the common issues such as less wasteful production and distribution models. But there is something that may be done at local level, such as promoting water from the tap, promoting the cloth nappies, promoting composting, and so on and so forth. And then pay as you throw, financial incentives, in order to make further progresses towards maximization of material recovery rate. We normally see that by means of curbside collection systems, you make what we call the giant leap forward. And by means of collection at the doorstep, you already get to 60, 70, or even 80%, depending on different situations. Then, once you implement pay as you throw, you tend to halve residual waste. So if you were at 60%, you tend to go towards 80%. If you were at 70, you tend to go towards 85% separate collection. Then there is another important supplement, which are the waste audits on residual waste, in order to detect what are the mistakes that are still present in the system. So we may address them through better design and management of separate collection systems, if this refers to mistaken behavior by the households, or we may address the level of industrial responsibility to have those items redesigned if they are not recyclable and therefore currently disposed of in residual waste. The organics are key, as I was already saying, because they are important both from the quantitative angle, still by far the largest contributor to separate collection rates, and so there is no way to get it to 65% if we don't include the organics. But also from the operational standpoint, because taking the organics out, we have that residual waste which is much less fermentable, so we can sharply reduce the collection rounds for residual waste, which leads to cost optimization, but also exerts a further driving effect for increased separation of the dry recyclables such as paper, plastics, metals, and so on and so forth. And we have got consistent evidence on the way to make the system comfortable for separate collection of the organics. We know there is a certain support by what we call the kitchen caddies. Most of the situations they are considered with vents ventilated in order to evaporate excess water. The use of paper bags or compostable bags is also maximizing the captures so as to minimize the percentage of organics inside residual waste. And this is also making it possible and viable in densely populated areas. By now we have got plenty of schemes. One is Ljubljana, and Jaka Kranj right after me will be reporting about Ljubljana. Milan is currently the largest city in Europe, which is covering 100% of the population, or 1.4 million people. Copenhagen started a few months ago, covering equally 100% of the population. There are different neighborhoods in Paris, totaling 120,000 people. Barcelona just started in the Sardinia neighborhood. Bristol already covered 100% of the population. So it's working. We may be confident it may be implemented also in the densely populated areas. So what may be the achievement? And as you can see from this chart, this is reporting on a typical situation. After implementing, this by the way refers to Capannori, the first municipality to adopt a formal commitment to zero waste in Europe as early as 2007. After implementing collection at the doorstep the first year, they had a decrease in the amount of waste to be managed in kilograms per inhabitant and year. Not only does it refer to better purchasing habits, more awareness by the households, but also it keeps off the system improperly delivered industrial waste. As long as you have got the dumpsters, the road containers permanently on the road, that's an invitation for industrial waste to be collected alongside, which is not so fair. Then a couple of years later, they implemented pay-as-you-throw, so there was a further decrease on the total waste amount and a further increase on the percentage of separately collected and recycled materials. In the end of the story, the common goal is minimization of residual waste. Financial incentives and pay-as-you-throw, normally across Europe, pay-as-you-throw is based on the number of setups for residual waste or the total volume of residual waste which gets delivered at the curb. It may be done with prepaid bags, as in this case, but there may be systems based on radio frequency or barcodes, and all of them, basically, they detect how many times you have delivered your residual waste. And if there is something weird that crosses your mind, and you may say, well, but if we implement such a system, most of the waste will end up in the woodlands, because people will try to deceive the system with fly tipping. Well, nothing like that. If you design it properly and run it properly with a good proportion between the fixed part of the fee and the variable part of the fee, you can see that typical results are like these. Municipal solid waste decreases, separate collection increases. In this case, it went on from roughly 60% to roughly 80%. Residuals decrease, so there was a decrease by 70% more or less residual waste. And this was distributed on more collection of plastics, more collection of paper, more collection of organics. So not more waste in the woodlands, but more materials going to recycling and composting. The same in comparatively big cities as Parma. Parma totals a population of 200,000 people. And Parma is already at 80% separate collection since they implemented a couple of years ago a pay-as-you-throw system. Now residual waste in Parma is slightly more than 100 kilos. So there was a decrease in 4 years by 56% residual waste, with a concurrent increase of more paper, more cardboard, more plastics and metals, organics, and so on. So to conclude with the last slides, even in Southern Europe, I told you, Italy is becoming an intriguing case because you can see that the national average by now is 52% separate collection nationwide. That was the last national average in 2016. We are still waiting the numbers from all areas in 2017. But you can see that in single municipalities and districts, there are recycling rates which are as high as 70%, 80%, and even more. Also, a few municipalities around 90%. And if we zoom into the data down to the provinces, which are the prefectures in other countries, the counties in other countries, you may see that single provinces totaling population between 500,000 people, 1 million people, or even more, they are around 85% separate collection. So if there are provinces already at that level, certainly also the others may follow up. And in single municipalities, if we adopt the metrics of minimized amount of residual waste, you can see many municipalities are below 75 kilograms per inhabitant year. Just the last 3 slides to report on the case of Sardinia. Sardinia is an intriguing case of a region which in a comparatively short time had skyrocketing separate collection rates and recycling rates. Not long ago, in the early 2000s, Sardinia was the least performing region in Italy with as little as 2% separate collection. So it may resemble many regions across Europe. Anyway, they consistently implemented strategies to promote separate collection. Now there are provinces from Sardinia which are reportedly around 60 and 70% separate collection, and single municipalities even around 85 and 90% separate collection, such as Tortoli, which we visited during the latest study tour we did at Zero Waste Europe. And basically, one of the main drivers was a consistent strategy defined by the regional government. As you can see, they had a separate collection goal. Well, in the new plan, the separate collection goal has been set at 80%, so consistently above the European goals, in order to ensure a material recovery goal, because the European target will be in terms of material recovery, so net of the processed objects. They want to achieve 70% by 2022. But basically, the driver was the economic incentives, which, depending on how performing or how lagging behind is a certain municipality, they get a rebate, a reduction on the gate fees for residual waste management, which may be also quite consistent, up to 50% less for municipalities above 80% separate collection. Or they get penalized with an extra levy for the treatment of residual waste if they don't meet the regional goal. And this is earmarked money. This is not going to other areas of the regional budget. This is earmarked money to support separate collection, recycling sites, composting sites, and waste reduction initiatives. So, with that being said, I'm done and finished, but please keep in mind that we circular economy, not only we wanted to recycle as much as possible, but we wanted to rethink all the materials since the design stage in order to make them recyclable and compostable and reusable for the future if they are not today. So it's a general paradigm shift. Therefore, we will have more materials appearing on the market and in our consumption and production models, which will be more recyclable in the future. And this will lead to redesigning of systems in order to maximize separate collection and recycling. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Enzo, for this very clear and complete presentation. I think it links very well to what Ferran was presenting right before. We are collecting a lot of questions related to your presentations, and we will answer it at the end of our round of presentations. You mentioned the case of Slovenia, and Jaka Kranz is actually going to follow up. He's the Secretary General, sorry, of Ecologists Without Borders. Jaka, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm from Ecologists Without Borders, and we've been working on waste prevention since our inception. So first, a bit of the wider frame. Slovenia is part of the European Union for about 15 years, and when we started, we weren't really that good in waste management, but now we're in the top when it comes to recycling rates, for example. So how did that happen? We had no separate ambition, we don't have our own targets, nothing like that, but it's true that we also don't have any incineration, basically. There's one small regional incinerator plant, and there were 2 cement kilns, which one has already shut down because it was malpracticing. At the same time, a lot of the landfills had to be closed down because the landfill directive imposed higher standards. So the gate fees rose and rose, and everyone was forced to think of alternatives to minimize their costs. Additionally, in the last financial perspective from the European Union, we built a few MBT centers, plants, and that was a really painful process. It was ineffective, and a bunch of problems caused our government to basically say for the current financial period, there won't be any EU money for waste infrastructure. So for the current 7 years, we know that whatever we want to reach, we have to do it via organizational measures, via awareness raising, via organizational optimizations, and things like that. Work with what we have. It's also true that Slovenia is a green country. The awareness in general is pretty high, and waste is a topic of public discourse. It's not just something the engineers have to take care of. And then there's also NGOs like us pushing everyone for minimum, for optimal waste, for optimal waste management. Are you getting blank slides again?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to solve it, but I'll continue speaking. So one of the things that we did was start a zero waste municipality program, where we say to municipalities, okay, maybe you don't want to pay that much, or maybe it's the prestige of having good waste management that excites you, or maybe it's the green label that excites you and you want to drive traffic from tourists. Well, this doesn't look good.
Jaka, we're going to share the slides for you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know why it stopped working. Okay, so the municipalities, it's a growing network of municipalities that all decided, okay, we want to do better, and they set their own goals, their own targets for waste management, and at their own leisure, using their own weaknesses, playing on their own strengths, and we're helping them along. So this has been going on since 2014. The network is growing. Currently, it has 9 municipalities, and I'll show you a few examples. The main thing is that at the European level, like Ferran said, we still don't have a goal for waste prevention, but all these municipalities set one for themselves. And it's the hardest thing to achieve, basically, because it's the third slide. Next slide, please. If you look at the graph on the right side, it's the snapshot from 2017. You can see in the second and third columns that all are basically working good on their targets of separate collection rates, on minimizing residuals. But the first column shows waste prevention, and that's where our main work still lies. Because while the economy is recuperating, there is economic growth, there is still waste growth also, because there is a correlation between the two, and we still are working on separating this joint effect. Now, it's also true that the municipalities are working on waste prevention measures, and while the amounts did rise, they did rise less than the average in the country. Next slide, please. So the best example of this would be Vrhnica, which is our best performant municipality. They've started even before our process to really look at their waste, and tackle it head on. The most important steps that they did to reach the current state, which is over 80% separate correction and about 60%, 60 kilograms per capita of residuals, was, like Enzo mentioned, start door-to-door collection, encourage home composting, so reducing the need to drive that waste away that frequently. They also have a basic pay-as-you-throw system since it's mandated from the government, but also they do all the general stuff that you say, okay, we need to raise awareness, we need to share information, but they upgrade it. They don't work just with school kids, they work with the teachers. They don't work just with the general population, they target their local businesses in particular, because the businesses, most of them don't have waste as their core business, and they help them to minimize it, to optimize their workings, and to move forward. They have, for example, in the kindergarten implemented reusable nappies, a scheme, because the kindergarten also has the chance to wash them there. They have a green watch for the public events that are happening in these 3 municipalities, where these guardians are basically telling people how to separate properly, be mindful also at events, because that's also a great source of municipal or municipal-like waste. And they have really great successes with their reuse centers, where they also encourage people to bring their own bulky waste to their reuse center, which is near a recycling depot, which means that they get the bulky waste in much better shape, which enables them then to repair it, repaint it, upgrade it, combine it, and then sell it back. So that's a driver for creation of green jobs. And also the users are stipulated to do this by getting a discount on their monthly waste management fee. They basically already reached 2 of the 3 of their goals. So in these short years, we have to upgrade them. The next example is Ljubljana, our capital, and it's also the best performing capital in Europe when it comes to waste management. Going on the zero waste journey was also one of the things that made them win the Green Capital Award. And they've been doing similar things as Vernica. For example, when they implemented door-to-door collection, they got a tripling of the amount of packaging waste that they collected. Before, it was all in mixed waste. They have very good public campaigns, professional, you can see them everywhere. The brochures that you get at home are like mini National Geographics, really, really, you want to read it, basically. They have also great successes with their youth centers, so they're planning to build 2 more. They have machines where you can buy even cleaning products and hygiene products in bulk without packaging. They have inspiration to start zero waste shops. They want to look at any detail possible, basically, because once you're maximizing your reduction and separate collection, you inspect everything, basically. So they're working with events, they're working with, for example, a company was making airbags, and they had a bunch of discarded airbags, but of course this is still usable, so they're making now reusable bags out of it in the reuse center. Let's see. Also, you might think, okay, they're reaching great results and all that, but this must have cost a lot. But in fact, Ljubljana has had pretty stable costs when it comes to the end user, and it has always been lower than the national average, as far as a third lower. And lastly, another example of a great performant municipality is Gorje, which is a municipality plagued by a completely different problem. It's a sister municipality to Bled, which is also in our network, and these are the 2 most famous touristic destinations in Slovenia. So more than 70% of all the municipal waste generated is by tourists. So they do all the regular stuff that I already mentioned, but they also specially target tourists. For example, when you drive to the municipality, you can already see a large sign saying, "Welcome to our zero waste municipality, please do your bit." The signs on the trucks and some brochures are bilingual, saying, if you don't need it, don't buy it, for example. All the litter bins around the lake were replaced to enable separation. That also drove the amount of residuals lower, which is also nearing 60 kilograms per person. And Bled, not Gorje, is also the first municipality to host a zero waste hotel. This was another project of our association where we minimized the waste generation there. And it's an uphill battle. If you look at the thin orange line, that's basically the trend of tourism. But they're still managing to improve, and hopefully the trend will be stable and we'll be able to upgrade their goals. Thank you. Oh, one more thing. All these measures are basically things that enable the inhabitants to live less wastefully. Because a lot of time you have communities that are all for it, but feel they don't have the means or the chances. But once you present them, things just go forward.
Thank you very much, Eka, and thanks for the presentation of the different Slovenian cases. And still today, Ljubljana is the first European capital to have decided to go zero waste. We are actually staying more or less in the same area in Europe, if we split Europe in two, and going this time to Romania. So it's going to be our last presentation before our Q&A session. Thanks very much for all the questions. So I actually now leave Zoltan Pastei, I'm sorry for the very bad pronunciation, who is the general manager of Ecovihor in Romania.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Thank you very much, Esra. Hi for everybody. My name is Zoltan Pastei, as you tell. I am representing a small waste management company from western part of Romania. And as you know, we, as Romania, are as well member state of European Union. So our we are also involved to respect all the targets in waste management, waste recycling. We tried to prove that in a small community in Eastern Europe, with very small money, you can reach within 3-4 months big achievement in recycling. So you can see we are somewhere okay, the slides. Yes. Community of Salacha is about 3,000 inhabitants populated. And as you can see, the picture shows that environmental problems, issues we do have also there. The waste management was till January something like this, a lot of bulky waste, a lot of packaging waste, recyclables, and construction waste all over the community. This was the problem. The recycling rate of collection was something 3%. So less than the Romanian average. Maybe the Romanian average is about 8 to 10% in bigger cities, but in rural areas you can find this 3% all over the country. So we tried to analyze the waste which is generated. Mainly we found a lot of bio-waste, a lot of ashes from the heating systems that they have over there, and that's why we try to design a collecting system to reduce this part of the existing waste. As well, we convinced the mayor that this community from 2018 January was joined to Zero Waste Cities, and then gets all the benefits. As you can see, they have also habits for just like zero waste. A little bit of the design system. 5 fractions were implemented, separate collections, one for cardboard and paper, one for plastic and metal, glasses as well separately. As Enzo said very nicely, the bio-waste was introduced as a separate collection with small bins, aerated bins for inside of the buildings and outside the bigger bins. And the residuals were also separate collected, but in a small, very small bin for a 40 liter, as you can see also here. We tried to communicate with the people with the awareness campaigns, and we promoted very much the separate collection and also the bio-waste home composting, as you can see in the results. I will show you. These are some pictures about our composting plan. Having composting the collected separate bio-waste and turning it to compost. We realized 2 waste collection centers for all those waste which were generated, just like construction waste, bulk waste, electrical waste, whatever. We realized several home composting system, and we tried to learn, first of all, the kinders in the kindergarten, the schoolers, and through them to contact the families, parents and grandparents, and realize the infrastructure in the schools with separate collection, and then to all of the other households. A few words about the results. As you can see, totally waste generated before implementing this system was about 27 tons per month, which means that is about 120 kilogram per person, and we reduced it to 12. So this was the big achievement of the project. That lot of waste like gravels, ashes, bio waste from the gardens were home composted, and then from all the generated amount, which is 12 tons, we have reached to separate collect about 7 tons, which is 61 to 65%. This is the biggest separate collection ratio in Romania. So this community in 3 months reached to be the first to realize this percentage. As you can see here also, we reduced with 50% the landfill, the amount of waste. Also the fractions of the metals and the plastics in the household waste. Here we try to identify 10 main elements to copy or to recreate this project maybe in similar European or Central European, Eastern European countries. First of all is to find a mayor who is devoted for this system. Without a mayor in these kind of communities, you cannot realize this project. A company who is familiar with 5 separate infrastructure, starting composition and sorting halls. Of course, joining to zero waste cities is always a good help. We have always support from Zero Waste Europe. The infrastructure for 5 beams, and of course awareness campaigns. We are believing in those campaigns which are face-to-face, from the kindergartens to church to pubs, where you can see the eyes of the population and see if they understand what do you want from them. And then of course door-to-door separate collection was the main issue to realize it, and maybe pay-as-you-throw and coercive measures the last ones. So if you can fulfill all these requirements, I think you can realize this project, whatever, from Bulgaria to Hungary to whatever in this region. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Zoltan. We have a lot of enthusiastic comments. Someone saying that, I think it's Karen saying she feels more optimistic about achieving a zero-waste society at some point. So we are also very enthusiastic. We actually compiled a lot of your questions, so feel free to still add a few of them. We have now, I believe, yes, 35 minutes to go through some of the questions. And I know Ferran has already prepared some of them. So I will actually let first Ferran reply, and then we'll go through the main questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ezra. Indeed, I was talking before of new objectives coming up, and what we see is like these are achievable objectives. Like if there's political will, if there's interest in going forward, we can meet them. I saw like some of the questions related to waste prevention. I'm very glad to hear about that, because it's often the most neglected part of the waste hierarchy. Even if that's at the top, it often comes at the very last moment that municipalities, companies, and member states implement waste prevention measures. And this has been also the case for European legislation. However, and this is something I forgot to mention in my presentation, there's indeed waste prevention measures in the already approved legislation and in the legislation to come. I will give a very quick overview to which are these. So if we in terms of waste prevention, member states are expected to take measures to prevent the waste, and within these measures that they will have to take, some of them are quite key. For instance, encourage reuse and repair of like the most repairable and reusable products, such as electronic products, textiles, furniture. And what is more interesting is that it also encourages member states will have to encourage the reuse of packaging or the reuse of construction products. This is quite interesting, both on the one hand for packaging because of the literability and the fact that it is a short-term or short time, or there are things that last very little. And in the case of construction, is because this is probably the largest waste stream we have outside of, yeah. Even if it doesn't make part of municipal waste, it's extremely large as waste stream. Then there's member states they all have committed to meet the Sustainable Development Goal of halving food waste and food losses by 2030. It's true that the calculation method is not clear, but member states will have to take measures to significantly reduce food waste and food losses all over the value chain. So like from production to consumer. So this is quite significant. Then thirdly, they'll have to take action to monitor marine litter, and most importantly, to take action to prevent it. And this is quite something new, that for the first time the member states will have the right to introduce market restrictions on certain products. And this is something I will see, because I saw the question on single-use plastic legislation. I will try to answer. And then quickly also, there's member states will have to promote a reduction of general waste generation, and then specifically of hazardous waste, because of the hazard it produces to the environment, and also to the difficulties it has for recycling and when it mixes up with other waste, etc. When it comes to the single-use plastic legislation, I will stop sharing my screen, which I think I did. No, I didn't. Okay. When it comes to single-use plastic legislation, this is still being negotiated, so it's not legislation yet, but we certainly have a proposal from the Commission that it basically gives an overview of what's the situation. We have a massive problem of plastics in the oceans and of marine litter, and what the Commission has done is they have identified 3 types of products that can easily end up in seas or in the environment, and for this type of product they have divided into the different type of actions we need to take. So we have those who have clear available substitutes, and for these the suggestion from the Commission is to substitute them with other materials or with other type of products. When it comes to those who are highly recyclable, and we have already existing good practices of maximization of the collection, like for instance plastic bottles. The Commission has set up a very high objective of collection, so 90% collection of bottles, so as to ensure that a minimum amount of them end up in the nature. And when it comes to products that have no substitution, there's no potential alternative, or and they're still very hard to collect them. For instance, you can think easily for cigarette butts. What the Commission proposes is to set up EPR schemes so as to producers to pay for the collection and the cleaning of these products, that eventually maybe force them to redesign the products into different ways, or maybe to raise awareness among the citizens. So is these three main ways of tackling the issue. But well, I can dig a bit deeper, but maybe I don't think we will have that much time. But well, maybe we'll have time. I can dig a bit deeper, even if I'm not the expert at ZWE Europe on this topic.
Thank you. Thank you, Ferran. We tried to cover most of the questions. There was maybe one that you could reply as well on outsourcing the recycling to the global south.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a question from Celine Rashid. Do these directives contain any limits to outsourcing recycling to the global south, where recycling operations have a big environmental footprint?
I will try to. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes, this is quite interesting topic, and it has not only like big environmental implications, but it is a topic that has grown quite a lot in the agenda, particularly after the Chinese ban for plastics, plastic waste coming from other countries. Generally speaking, the EU legislation, what it says is that the waste that is hazardous cannot be exported outside of OECD countries. This is I'm not fully sure, because this is not my field of expertise, but I think it's OECD regulation, not EU. But in any case, this should not be the case, that hazardous waste is exported to outside of the EU. Of course, there's illegal trade, such as for electronic products that are supposed to be sent to different countries like Western Africa, etc., because they are reusable, but then in the end they end up in landfilling or being recycled in not in substandard ways. What the new legislation says is that member states can only account for recycling the waste that is treated in broad ways, in a broadly equivalent way as it would be in Europe. So it is allowed to export waste for recycling outside of the EU, but they will have to trace this waste, because we need to know whether the actual recycling happens. So like we can only measure recycling once it enters into the what we call final recycling process. And secondly, it will have to follow the broadly equivalent recycling processes as in Europe. Of course, it's not the ideal situation, neither from the environmental point of view nor from the economic point of view, but because if the idea is to advance towards the circular economy for to create also a jobs and a capacity to reintegrate materials in Europe, it doesn't make much sense to export it, but also like the quality of the materials. But well, I think that if we manage to set in place separate collection schemes that are effective and they provide high quality materials, the situation should solve itself more or less. I mean, because the more the quality of the material, the higher the value, and the more economically interesting it is to recycle it in Europe. But at the moment, it's true, this is something hasn't been tackled enough by EU legislation.
Thank you, Ferran. There is a question that actually links both EU legislation, the EU directives, and a recurring question related to incinerators. So one of you asked, do this EU directive leave space for incinerators? And another participant commented saying that we keep building incinerators even if they are waste to energy. And how do we actually face the situation of having incineration still very present? So I'll first, Ferran, let you just complete the part on do this EU directives leave space for incinerators, and I'll actually then leave the floor to Enzo to give a bit of an overview of how can you work when there's incinerators in the equation.
Well, EU legislation says that member states have to meet the 65% recycling target, and then they have at least 65% recycling target, and then they have a maximum of 10% landfilling by 2035 is the same year. So one could potentially have a deduction and say like, oh, so it gives a gap of 25% for incineration. However, this somehow is cheating because you don't take into account that in order to meet 65% recycling, you need to have significantly higher separate collection rates. So if you take into account the losses of materials or the impurities within the processes, you need to have significantly higher separate collection rates. So when it comes to the way of thinking incineration of let's collect all the waste together and send it to burn, I don't think the current legislation gives much space for that, and it doesn't make much sense. So indeed, the legislation doesn't say incinerators need to close by tomorrow, but the economic and the environmental interest of building new ones or having them will be declining as time goes by and as we manage to actually divert waste from mixed waste into the separate collection. So the big question here is whether member states and cities are up to introduce separate collection schemes that are actually effective and they manage to have little contamination and they manage to capture the biggest amount of materials. If they manage to do so, I would say incineration and landfill have little to do in the future. Then it's true that, and it's something I didn't comment, but in this conjunction in the circular economy package, there was also the communication on waste to energy that is non-binding, but is the official position of the Commission with regards to the role of waste to energy within circular economy. And what it says the Commission is that in certain member states we have overcapacity of incineration because there was either a not well planned regionally speaking, there were plants everywhere and they didn't plan the capacities within the country, or because there has been changes in the recent years, etc. But what it says, the communication is that like countries should focus primarily on separately collecting the biowaste because it's the biggest fraction, and in case they want to extract energy from waste, probably they should focus on anaerobic digestion of separately collected biowaste. But other than that, I would say the importance of incineration will certainly decline in the near future. And some member states like Sweden, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands will have to at least halve the incineration of their waste in the coming years.
Thank you, Ferran. Enzo, you've been mentoring and supporting members of Zero Waste Europe and a certain number of groups from civil society in fighting incinerators at the local level and developing zero strategies. So what is your take on this question? What can we do when we have this in the equation?
Yeah, so first of all, I would like to second, can you hear me, Esther?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, so first of all, I'd like to second what Ferran just said on the fact that the reference document on incineration in circular economy, which was the European communication from January 2017, basically sends a warning across to member states to say it singles out two reference situations for the countries with overcapacity. It says explicitly stop funding incineration, tax incineration, adopt a moratorium on new incinerators, and start decommissioning the existing ones. Whereas for the other countries without incineration, it basically says, try to consider how much will be your waste in 30 years' time, because I've seen in the chat box that some were asking, how can we afford planning new incinerators when they will be there to work for 20 or 30 years, while we have to make a huge progresses towards a circular economy? And that's basically the problem. Incineration is lacking flexibility. We have got other strategies for residual waste management, and they are basically based, well, you have to consider, while our zero waste municipalities are progressing to zero waste, we happen to know what is in residual. And basically in residual waste, we have got many lakes, because we make separate organics much more effective. We have got non-packaging plastics. They get concentrated in residual waste for choice, because unfortunately, EPR systems, which were mandated by the packaging directive, exit producer responsibility, only packaging plastic. For instance, they end up in residual waste. And whatever is made of plastics and it's not packaging ends up in residual waste. But still it is made of plastics and it is potentially recyclable. And also we have got those materials which are harder to be recycled now, but they may be subject for redesigning in order to be made recyclable in the near future. So what we say is that the new regions, the countries, those districts where they have got no capacity yet for residual waste management, since we have got an obligation coming from the landfill directive to pre-treat the waste which is going to landfill, they should rather consider such systems as what we call material recovery biological treatments, which couples a biological stabilization of the organics. It may even be the nappies which are still in residual waste, which is another reason why we promote the cloth nappies in order to use the throwaway which concentrate in residual waste. And also they have got some sorting equipment in order to extract more valuable from residual waste. And this keeps the system flexible, because as long as such facilities, they have got sorting technologies, they may change their potential in time, less residual waste and more materials from separate collection, which keeps them flexible.
Thank you very much, Enzo. There are some more questions coming in, and we're already frustrated not to be able to cover all of them. There was another question that was related, let me just add it, on compostable packaging, compost facilities. I think Jaka had a few words to say on this, and I will let you, Enzo, complete. So to everyone, the question was about, let me read it. There are more and more compostable packaging. The compost facilities do not like them because they degrade slower than organic waste, and the recyclers do not like them also because they contaminate the plastic recycling streams. So the question was, what would be your solution to ensure that we recover them and they don't only be sent to incineration landfill? So I'll let Jaka and Enzo complete this question.
Okay, so first thing, the general approach is not to promote compostable packaging as a solution to plastic pollution. It's not a substitute that will fix everything, but as long as the packaging itself is industrially compostable and has the necessary standard, I think it's 13,432, it doesn't really bother the composting process. I can tell you from Ljubljana's example, because the composting takes, I think, 3 months usually. All the plastic bags that the municipality distributes for separate collections of organics, they are certified to degrade within that period, and they have a lab to test it. So that's not that much of an issue. But like I said, compostable plastics are not the end-all, be-all solution. So we're in Europe, in Slovenia, in the world, actively campaigning against it as a silver bullet. Of course, it has a smaller place.
Thanks, Jaka. Enzo?
Yeah, Jaka was spot on. And the key sentence was his first one. Bioplastics are not the general solution to the plastic issue. The plastic issue should be addressed through consistent redesign for reduction and durability of packaging and replacement of plastics for durable, recyclable materials, redesigning of plastics in order to simplify the universe of plastics and make them much more recyclable than they are right now. We don't consider bioplastics. We've been long using bioplastics in Italy as a tool for separate collection of the organics. We never consider the bioplastics as a solution to the plastic pollution problem. We consider them as a tool, a wonderful tool, in order to optimize separate collection of bio-waste. So compostable bag-rated composting sites, as long as they meet the European standard EN 132. And this is why in Italy, as in Spain, as in England, they say, yeah, we are totally fine with receiving compostable bags. And they even tend to support the use of compostable bags in order to avoid households using traditional plastic bags, which is a problem when you don't use the compostable bags. We also may consider other specific uses, but they have to be constrained. For instance, in sustainable event management, we tend to prioritize reusable, of course, needless to say. But when we don't have the dishwashers, because probably it is an event in the countryside, and so you have no connection to the network, the electrical network and the water network, so you don't have the dishwashers. So compostable tableware in that specific case is a wonderful plan B. As a plan B, it's not perfection, but still way better than plan Z, which would be incineration or landfilling. So we want pragmatic and we want to keep open to those few uses of compost plastics which are well connected to separation of organics and composting schemes.
Thank you very much. And so talking about facilities, there was a question right now on is MBT facilities considered up-to-date waste management technology?
For whom?
Yeah, and so we don't hear you.
Yeah, I was muted by you.
Yes, now we can.
This very much depends on the type. Yeah, and my reply is this very much depends on the type of MBT, because the old-fashioned MBT, we are not supported to it since they tend to produce RDF, which is then sent for co-incineration at cement kilns or power stations. And that's not circular economy. This is what we call destructive disposal because it destroys resources. Whereas the paper and plastics which end up in RDF, they may be recovered as paper and plastics as long as we maximize separate collection of the organics, and therefore we make residual waste more workable. This is why we tend to call the residual waste management options, we tend to promote not as MBT, mechanical biological treatment, but as MRBT, which is material recovery biological treatment, to put emphasis on the recovery of materials.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Enzo, Jaka, and Ferran. We have a few questions for Zoltan. There's a lot of enthusiastic comments, especially moving from the 3% that are like kind of shocking. So one of the questions for you, Zoltan, was about, from Michele Gavini, was a composting facility already in place before the new separate collection scheme? And did you apply a gate fee for treating food waste?
Thank you for the question. Yes, the composting facility was already placed before the collection scheme. This is existing from 2011, the composting facility. Basically, we were composting just waste, green waste from gardens. And answering to the second question, of course, the gate fee was zero, because this project in Salacha County is a pilot project, so which tries to stimulate the local collecting operator to increase the amounts of bio-waste collected, and that's why we created an economical interest. And if this activity will increase in the region, we try to keep this way.
Thank you very much. And actually related to this part, there were a few questions on how do we get people on board? How does it work with the households? Someone was also asking, sorry, are there any examples in PSS systems of households regularly accessing their waste data, and how this information actually affects their behavior? So based on your experience, what was the work that you did with households?
It was a very simple pay-as-you-throw scheme. It was basically the existing infrastructure established as a unique volume. Nothing more than this volume will be collected. And the second, the extra amount will be not collected. So you have to fit in that beans and in that plastic bags. And the second one, if somebody will not collect separately, then the mayor said that will increase for that person the payment of the waste fee with twice or thirds the normal one.
Okay, and so how, because I believe you had a few public presentations and trainings, and I think it was also similar in what happened in Slovenia. So about this engagement with citizens, how does it work? Maybe giving more examples.
Thank you for your question. Yes, we have a lot of meetings. There was very interesting because everybody was telling us that the people is not prepared for such separate collection, and in reality we faced the opposite. They were saying to us that, oh, we were waiting for a long time to realize this one in this county, and we were welcomed. Of course, there was always 5 to 10% of the inhabitants who are very opposite to the system, or they are too old to change their habits, or they are against everything, not just a separate collection. But I can tell you that 90% of them were changing these habits, as I told you, within 1 or 2 months. And we met them on the streets, public meetings, on the community house, as I told you, on pubs, schools, wherever there was a possibility to discuss with them and to provoke them to show their opinion regarding this point.
Thank you very much. I believe the main questions related to your presentation. If there's a final question on the case of Bihor, I will be happy to have it. In the meantime, I wanted to maybe address one of the questions that was, how do you work with businesses, or what is the relationship with the other players? Because here we're discussing a lot of the relationship between the municipalities, the waste management company, when there's one, and citizens. And I believe in the Slovenian case, you have also some examples of working with other allies, I would say. So Jaka, can you explain a bit this part?
Sure. First, clarification. This zero waste process for the municipalities is not a top-down thing. Sure, the municipality has to sign a commitment and all that, but it's a bottom-up approach, because the commitment is just the first step. They have to create a zero waste board with representative not only from the municipality and from their waste management company, and us as a watchdog, for example, but also the local community. And that's usually one NGO, and then whoever they deem necessary to also include to have better results, because the role of the Zero Waste Board is to be the yearly or more often if needed monitoring tool that's looking at the progress, that's looking at the things that have been done, things that need to be done, and suggesting them. It's a board, a discussion board, and sometimes there are also representative of businesses there, because, for example, in the municipality of Postojna, another great touristic municipality, their main thing is about our cave and castle. So the guys that run this are part of the board, as they are very much involved in both running the municipality and the waste that's generated. But of course, as let's say, as fighters for a world without waste and for a zero waste lifestyle, we also the NGO works directly with businesses, be it through consulting them on how to minimize their food waste or some other waste, or connecting them back to the municipalities for them to work together to achieve better results. It's this field of waste doesn't have many enemies in the sense, because minimization has economic benefits, has health benefits, has environmental benefits. So there's a great potential to gain allies all around you.
Thank you very much, Jeka. There's actually a question that links to this different fields and sectors. You mentioned in your presentation the first Zero Waste hotel in Slovenia, and you've been also working with hospitals. One of the participants is asking, are there some best practices per sector? Maybe you can share a few insights on these two cases, both hospital and the hotel.
Well, for hospital, I know there have been some good analysis done across Europe, but Esra will tell you that in November there will be a conference on food waste that if you're interested you can attend. I think it will be in Brussels, and there you will be able to hear about the way we minimized food waste in a Slovenian hospital. We did a very detailed analysis, and if you care about food waste, hospitals is the place to be, because you pay for food waste 3 times there, not only for waste and for the discarded food, but also it impacts the healing process of the patients and the amount of time the hospital needs to take care of them and so on. So it's even worse than in, let's say, households or on the farms or in the supermarkets. So that was food waste. For tourism, yes, the hotel, we have some great allies from Italy who also were the first to start, I believe, with a range of 15 to 20 hotels already on this path. And we look at the international definition of zero waste and then try to minimize both waste usage, water, electricity, and changing the culture not only inside the hotel but also of the guests. And yes, this hotel in Rivno is the first such case in Slovenia. And you can see that basically small steps can do a lot. You know, people just need to know, people need to start to think about these things, and a lot of things can be done without great monetary inputs.
Thank you, Eka. We are 5 minutes before the end of our webinar. Thank you very much for all your contribution. Enzo had a comment, and I will actually invite all of you, the 4 of you, to make a final comment on your perspective. I mean, we started this conversation saying we have 10 years to reach EU targets, and how can we make it happen? And maybe it will be helpful to finish with, let's hope, a positive note. So actually start from Enzo, Ferran, Zoltan, and Jaka. Enzo?
No, just a note for everybody's perusal that actually many of the questions which were in the chat box, I feel excited by the questions because indeed there was so much interest and enthusiasm around case histories. But many of the informations they are seeking may be downloaded free of charge from the Zero Waste Europe website, because we produce regularly case studies. So if you go to zerowasteeurope.org, you will find a series of downloadables. They are on pilot communities implementing zero waste programs, new business models, cities that have adopted community composting because they had no composting sites, and so on and so forth. So that's extremely important. Certainly, my last comment would be on infrastructure. Of course, we have understood through this webinar that the software in the system, which is participation by the people, is at least as important as the hardware, notably infrastructure. But nevertheless, we also need infrastructure. We are supportive to establishing infrastructure for proper waste management. And first and foremost, we are supportive for infrastructure for the management of organics, and we need it. But you don't need very large sites. You may also start from scratch in isolated areas with pilot programs and with small scale initiatives, because one of the intrinsic good angles in composting is that it is incredibly scalable. So you may promote home composting, you may promote community composting, you may have decentralized composting. In Austria, they have got a rural composting done by farmers. They call it bäuerliche Kompostierung, or you may have centralized composting. So whatever you need, your specific context, we get you covered.
Thank you very much, Enzo. Ferran?
Yes, well, indeed, we've learned that the targets may be scary. Some people were asking of potential penalties from EU if not the targets are not met. I'm sorry we skipped that question, but like some members say that indeed like paying penalties because they were brought to ECJ, but probably the biggest penalty is the hazard they're inflicting to their environment and the economic losses there, or the potential losses they're having in their country, because they're not creating local jobs, they're not dealing with the recyclable materials in a way that it can contribute to the economy locally. So that's probably the biggest penalties these cities or regions could have. That being said, what we see is that like if there's political will, if there's intention, and we try to build the system step by step, and involving the citizens, we can make it happen. Zero Waste Europe, we've tried to do, as Enzo was doing, case studies, and they're all of them downloadable for free from our website, and we're gonna organize a study tour at the end of the year to visit good practices here around Brussels. So all of you who are interested in seeing in live how it looks like, good practices, good separate collection, involvement of citizens, separate collection of bio-waste, reuse centers, waste prevention practices, etc. Feel free to come. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Zoltan.
Hi, thank you. It was I was very happy to hear that MBTs are not likely the best practice now in Europe. And it's a little bit confusing for Romanian local authorities, because a lot of European funds invested MBTs, financed MBTs are now just beginning to work in Romania, and now to say to those municipalities that you have to shut them, it was it will be very hard to explain them that European Union law is changing, and they have to change the new habits already. But happy to hear that, and keep on working.
Thanks, Zoltan. Jaka?
Examples today, but we have a large network of municipalities that are on this path. So if we manage to do and have such good progress during the economic recession, we have no excuse. You have no excuse. Come and join us.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the four of you for all your insights. We have a lot of positive feedbacks, and I think we are now inspired to take action by hopefully all over Europe. So some of you mentioned case studies that are downloadable on our website. There was a question on prevention. We also had case studies on good practices related to prevention, so I invite you to check them. Jaka mentioned November conference. For those who are in Brussels or nearby, we have a conference on food waste preventions and a separate collection of bio-waste during the European Waste Reduction Week. And also study tour happening early December here in Belgium. So thank you very much. We will follow up with the presentations and some material that we've discussed here. And our next webinar will be the 5th of November on Pay As You Throw. You already have the link to register, and seeing the questions that we got on Pay As You Throw, I think it's going to be a very interesting webinar as well. So thank you very much. Have a great day all, and hope to see you soon.